He was ready to sign the adoption papers, until the maid revealed the truth about the child's real mother. Hi, I'm John Parker, and today's story will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give your like, it means so much to me, and leave in the comments which city or country you are listening from. The room fell silent as Graham Whitmore's pen hovered just inches above the dotted line. The adoption papers lay neatly on the mahogany desk in his Charleston office, the afternoon light slicing through the tall windows behind him. His lawyer, Meredith Cole, sat poised with her hands folded, waiting for the stroke of the pen that would make Ethan, the little boy playing quietly with wooden blocks in the corner, his legal son. Evelyn Whitmore, Graham's mother, stood stiffly near the fireplace, a faint smile of approval on her face, and then, just as the ink was about to touch the paper, the door burst open. "Mr. Whitmore, wait!" Violet Jensen's voice rang out, trembling but resolute. Her chest rose and fell as if she had run the length of the entire estate. Her hands clutched a small envelope, its edges crumpled from the grip of her fingers. Everyone turned. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Meredith frowned at the interruption. Graham's brows drew together as he slowly lowered the pen. "Violet," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and annoyance. "This is highly inappropriate." "What is it?" Violet swallowed hard. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had thought about this moment all night, pacing the servants' quarters, wrestling with her conscience. But when she saw Graham's hand on that pen, something inside her refused to stay silent. "I can't let you sign those papers," she said, her voice breaking. "Not until you know the truth about Ethan's mother." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Ethan's small hands froze mid-air. Evelyn gasped audibly. Meredith set her glasses down, sensing that something monumental was about to unfold. Graham's face hardened. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low but dangerous. Violet stepped forward, her shoes clicking on the polished wood floor. "Please," she said softly, glancing at Ethan, "I think it's better if he doesn't hear this." Graham's jaw tightened. He stood, tall and imposing, his shadow stretching across the desk. "Meredith, take Ethan to the kitchen for a moment." The lawyer hesitated, then gently took the boy's hand and led him out. The sound of Ethan's small footsteps echoing down the hallway. When the door clicked shut, Graham turned back to Violet. "You have exactly 1 minute to explain yourself." Violet's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a faded photograph and a letter she had been hiding for weeks. She laid them carefully on the desk, right next to the unsigned adoption papers. "This is from Vanessa Hale," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Ethan's biological mother. She's alive, and she's been trying to reach you." Evelyn's face drained of color. "That woman," she hissed. "She abandoned that child at birth. She doesn't deserve to. She didn't abandon him." Violet's voice rose with a conviction that surprised even herself. "There's more to the story than you know, and if you sign those papers today, you will never forgive yourself when you learn the truth." Graham stared at the photograph, the air around him suddenly heavy. His hand, that once held the pen, now clenched into a fist. "Tell me everything," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Violet nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Then you need to sit down, Mr. Whitmore," she said, "because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about Ethan. And about Vanessa." The room felt like it was holding its breath, and just like that, the moment of celebration had turned into the beginning of a storm. Graham sank slowly into the leather chair behind his desk, the weight of Violet's words pressing down on him like a tidal wave. The crisp autumn breeze fluttered through the slightly open window, but the air inside felt suffocating. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly, her lips pursed, clearly preparing for a fight. "Speak," Graham ordered, his voice controlled, but carrying the tone of a man used to getting answers. Violet took a deep breath, her fingers still clutching the edges of the envelope. "Vanessa never wanted to give Ethan up," she began softly. 5 years ago, she was forced to disappear because of something she discovered about the people she was working for. She didn't abandon her child. She was trying to protect him." Graham's jaw clenched. "Protect him from what?" Violet's eyes flickered nervously toward Evelyn before landing back on Graham. "From a man who threatened to take Ethan away if she didn't stay silent. She worked at one of your hotels, Mr. Whitmore. She had stumbled upon a secret about a senior manager skimming money from the business. When she confronted him, he told her that if she talked, she would regret it. 2 weeks later, she found a note warning her that her baby would be harmed unless she left town." Evelyn scoffed, her voice sharp. "Convenient story. That woman ran away to save herself, not the boy. She left him in a hospital crib with no name on the birth certificate." Violet's expression hardened. "That's not true, Mrs. Whitmore. I have the hospital records." She pulled a second paper from the envelope and set it on the desk. Her name was on the paperwork until someone had it removed. This was no accident. Vanessa was terrified, and she trusted that Ethan would end up somewhere safe until she could come back for him. Graham picked up the paper with trembling hands, scanning it quickly. His heart thudded as he saw Vanessa's name scribbled in the margin, nearly erased but still faintly legible. "Why are you only telling me this now?" Graham asked, his voice rising. "Because I only confirmed it last week," Violet said, stepping closer. "Vanessa sent me this letter, begging me to delay the adoption until she could speak with you personally. She's been living in Savannah, working 2 jobs, saving money just to come back and fight for her son." For a moment, silence settled over the room again, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Graham pressed his fingers to his temple, the weight of the decision crushing him. "You expect me to believe a woman who disappeared for 5 years?" he asked bitterly. "No," Violet said gently. "I expect you to believe Ethan deserves to know the truth about where he comes from before you decide the rest of his life for him." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice like ice. "Graham, do not let this maid manipulate you. That child belongs in this family, and this family only. Think about the scandal this could cause." "Mother!" Graham's voice snapped like a whip, making Evelyn flinch. He stood towering over both women now. "This is not about scandal. This is about my son." His chest rose and fell heavily. He turned to Violet. "Where is she? Where is Vanessa now?" Violet hesitated. "She's in town. She wanted to come here herself, but she was afraid you wouldn't let her through the gates." A muscle worked in Graham's jaw. "Then bring her here," he said finally, each word deliberate. "If she wants to speak to me, she can do it face to face. Tonight." Violet nodded, relief washing over her features, but Evelyn's glare could have cut glass. "You'll regret this, Graham," she warned. "Maybe," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the photograph still lying on the desk. "But I'd regret it more if I didn't hear her out." As Violet turned to leave the room to make the call, Graham stared at the unsigned adoption papers. For the first time, they didn't feel like a promise of hope. They felt like a question mark hanging over all their futures. Outside, the sun had begun to set, painting the Charleston sky in fiery orange and purple hues, as if signaling the storm that was about to break over the Whitmore household. The Whitmore estate had never felt so heavy with anticipation. As night fell, the gas lanterns lining the driveway flickered to life, casting long shadows across the perfectly trimmed hedges. Graham stood by the window of his study, staring out into the darkening horizon. His reflection looked back at him, a man torn between duty and truth. The adoption papers still lay on the desk behind him, untouched, like a ghost, reminding him of the decision he almost made. Headlights finally appeared at the far end of the driveway. Violet's old sedan rolled slowly toward the mansion, gravel crunching beneath its tires. Graham felt his stomach knot. Behind him, Evelyn sat rigid in an armchair, her teacup untouched, her expression icy. When the car stopped, Violet stepped out first, her face illuminated by the porch light. Then from the passenger side, a slender figure emerged. Vanessa Hale. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. She clutched a worn leather purse close to her side, as if it contained her very soul. Graham turned as the door opened. Violet ushered Vanessa into the room carefully, as if she were leading her into a lion's den. "Mr. Whitmore," Violet said softly. "This is Vanessa Hale." Vanessa swallowed hard and met Graham's piercing gaze. For a moment neither spoke. The silence stretched until Evelyn broke it with a sharp scoff. "So," Evelyn said, standing, "the runaway finally returns. I hope you understand what you've done. Abandoning that child, leaving him for strangers to raise. And now you dare show your face here?" Vanessa flinched but didn't look away. "I didn't abandon him," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I stayed away because I thought it was the only way to keep him safe." Graham stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow across the rug. "Explain," he said simply, his tone brooking no argument. Vanessa nodded and opened her purse, pulling out a stack of letters, some worn, some unopened. "I wrote to the hospital, to social services, even to this house," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But my letters were returned or ignored. I had no way of knowing where Ethan had gone. I only learned 6 months ago that he was here, with you." Graham took the letters from her and flipped through them. The postmarks were real, the handwriting desperate, something twisted in his chest. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "Because I had nothing," Vanessa said, her eyes shining with tears. "No money, no lawyer, no power. I worked 2 jobs just to afford the trip back. And even then, I was terrified that I would be turned away." Evelyn's voice cut through the air like a knife. "This is ridiculous, Graham. She has no legal standing. The boy has been with you for years. Sign the papers tomorrow and end this charade before it goes any further." Graham turned to his mother, his jaw tight. "Mother, enough." The sharpness in his tone silenced the room. Evelyn's eyes widened. She wasn't used to hearing that tone from her son. "Vanessa," Graham said after a beat, softer now, "if what you're saying is true, then you owe me and Ethan the full story. Every detail tonight." Vanessa nodded, clutching her purse tighter. "I will tell you everything," she said. "But it's not just about Ethan. There's something you need to know about the man who threatened me, and what he did to your business." Graham's brow furrowed. "My business?" "Yes," Vanessa whispered. "The man who forced me to leave is still working for you." The room froze. Violet's eyes widened. Evelyn gasped. Graham's mind raced. Dozens of names flashing through his thoughts, but one in particular sent a chill down his spine. "Who?" he demanded. Vanessa hesitated, her lip trembling. Then she spoke the name, and suddenly, everything Graham thought he knew about the people closest to him, about the empire he had built, began to unravel. The name fell from Vanessa's lips like a stone dropped into deep water. Colton Briggs. Graham's breath caught. The name echoed in his mind. Colton had been his most trusted operations manager for years, a man who oversaw 3 of his flagship hotels and had dinner with him and Evelyn every Thanksgiving. "Colton," Graham repeated, his voice low, almost unbelieving. "That's impossible." "It's not impossible," Vanessa said, her hands shaking as she clutched the strap of her purse. "He's the one who discovered I was pregnant. At first he seemed helpful. He promised he'd make sure I kept my job, even after the pregnancy showed. But one night I overheard him on the phone. He was siphoning money from the business, transferring funds to a private account. When he saw me in the hallway, he cornered me and made me swear I hadn't heard a thing. But I had proof, an invoice I'd copied earlier that day. The next morning, a note was left on my apartment door. It said, "Leave town or you'll never see your baby grow up." Violet took a step closer to Vanessa, her face tense. "And you believed him?" Vanessa's eyes brimmed with tears. "I didn't have a choice. A week later, my car was tampered with. The brakes failed while I was driving. I barely survived. That's when I knew he was serious." Graham felt as if the walls of the study were closing in. He turned toward the window, running a hand over his face. "Colton has been with my company for over a decade," he muttered. "I trusted him with everything. That's what made it so easy for him," Vanessa replied quietly. "No one suspected him. And by the time I left town, I was too scared to come forward. But when I found out Ethan was here with you, I knew I had to risk everything to make this right." Evelyn's face had gone pale. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. She sank back into her chair, her hand clutching the armrest. Graham turned back, his expression hardening, his blue-green eyes flashing with resolve. "If this is true, then he's not just a thief. He's a threat to my family," "He is," Vanessa said firmly. "I've seen him near the house. He knows where you live. I think he suspects I'm back." The room was silent for a long moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock impossibly loud. "Violet," Graham said suddenly, his tone all business now. "Take Ethan to your quarters and keep him there until I call for you. I don't want him near the main house tonight." "Yes, Mr. Whitmore," Violet said, nodding quickly. She hurried from the room. When the door closed, Graham sat back down and steepled his fingers, his mind racing. "Vanessa, you're staying here tonight," he said. "I'll have a guest room prepared. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling my auditors. If Colton Briggs has stolen from me, I'll find out." Vanessa hesitated, clearly exhausted but grateful. "Thank you," she said softly. But before she could sit, Evelyn finally spoke, her voice quivering. "Graham, think about what you're doing. This could destroy everything your father built. The Whitmore name, the company." Graham turned sharply. "If the Whitmore name stands for covering up corruption, then it deserves to be destroyed." Evelyn blinked, stunned into silence. The tension in the room was electric. Vanessa slowly sank into a chair, clutching one of the letters in her lap like a lifeline. For the first time in 5 years, she felt hope flicker inside her chest. But as she glanced toward the window, she caught a shadow moving near the far end of the property. Someone was out there watching. Her heart skipped a beat. "Graham," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. "I think we're being watched." Graham moved toward the window in a flash, his tall frame cutting through the golden lamplight. Outside, the night had grown eerily quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, only the faint sway of the Spanish moss in the trees. He narrowed his eyes and caught it, a figure moving quickly along the fence line before vanishing into the shadows. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice sharp. He grabbed the flashlight that sat on a shelf by the door and stepped into the hallway. "Graham, don't!" Evelyn's voice quivered. "Call security." But Graham was already striding toward the back door, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Vanessa jumped to her feet. "I'm coming with you." "No," he said firmly, spinning to face her. "If this is who we think it is, I won't risk you being seen." "Stay inside." Vanessa froze, her pulse hammering, but nodded. Outside, the night air was crisp and heavy with tension. Graham's flashlight beam cut across the manicured lawn, sweeping over the fountain, the garden, the edge of the oak trees. For a moment nothing moved, and then a branch cracked to his left. He swung the beam in time to catch the glint of something metallic, maybe a flashlight, maybe a knife, before the figure bolted into the woods. Graham gave chase, his footsteps pounding the earth. "Hey, stop!" His voice echoed across the property. The figure was fast, ducking under low-hanging branches, vaulting a smaller gate near the stables. Graham cursed, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Finally, the figure disappeared into the marshland beyond the property line. Breathless, Graham stood still, the flashlight beam shaking in his grip. Whoever it was, they had been watching the house, and they knew how to escape. By the time he returned to the mansion, Vanessa was pacing in the study, wringing her hands. Evelyn sat stiffly, her face pale. "What happened?" Vanessa asked the moment he stepped back inside. "He was here," Graham said grimly, setting the flashlight down. "I couldn't catch him. But he's not going to stay in the shadows much longer." Violet appeared in the doorway, holding Ethan's hand. "Mr. Whitmore, Ethan can't sleep," she said softly. "He heard the noise outside." Graham knelt down to the boy's level, his voice softening. "Hey, buddy. Everything's okay. You're safe here." Ethan looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Was it a bad man?" Graham's throat tightened. "No one is going to hurt you," he said firmly, glancing at Violet. "Take him back upstairs and stay with him." When they were gone, Graham turned back to Vanessa. "Tomorrow we take this to the sheriff. If Colton Briggs thinks he can intimidate us into silence, he's mistaken." Vanessa hesitated. "You don't know what he's capable of, Graham. When I left town, he wasn't just stealing money. He was laundering it for someone else. Someone dangerous." The words landed like a second blow. "Dangerous." Graham repeated. "Yes," Vanessa said, her voice low. "I think Colton is tied to something much bigger. Something that could destroy you if you go after him the wrong way." Evelyn stood abruptly. her composure cracking. "This is exactly why you shouldn't get involved, Graham. Call the police, yes, but don't dig deeper. Don't put this family at risk." But Graham's jaw had already set like stone. "This family is already at risk. We just didn't know it until now." He turned to Vanessa, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and determination. "Tomorrow morning I want you to tell me everything. Every name, every place, every threat. No more secrets." Vanessa nodded, tears sliding down her face. "I will, but promise me something," she whispered. "What?" "Promise me that when this is over you'll let me see Ethan, at least once. He deserves to know who I am." Graham hesitated, the weight of her request heavy on his shoulders. After a long pause he nodded. "You have my word." But as the grandfather clock chimed midnight, none of them knew that Colton Briggs was already making his next move, and that by morning, the Whitmore household would face its greatest test yet. Dawn broke over the Whitmore estate with an uneasy stillness. The house was unusually quiet, as though it too knew something decisive was about to happen. Graham had been awake since before sunrise, sitting in his study with a pot of untouched coffee, going through financial reports, bank statements, and internal memos. Each document only deepened the pit in his stomach. By 9 a.m., the auditors had arrived. A team of 2 accountants and 1 IT specialist began combing through the digital records on Graham's laptop. Vanessa sat silently in the corner of the study, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. Violet hovered near the doorway, waiting in case Ethan needed her upstairs. Evelyn refused to come down for breakfast. The entire mansion seemed to be holding its breath. An hour later, one of the auditors looked up, his expression grim. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "we've found multiple discrepancies in the last 3 years' accounts. Hundreds of thousands have been funneled into a shell company under a fake name. But the signature authorization matches someone on your payroll." Graham's throat went dry. "Whose?" The auditor hesitated, then turned the screen toward him. "Colton Briggs!" Graham felt a hot surge of anger rise in his chest. It was real. Vanessa had been telling the truth all along. He pushed back his chair and stood abruptly. "Get him on the phone," he ordered. "Tell him to come here now." Vanessa stood quickly. "Graham, don't confront him alone. He's dangerous." Graham met her gaze, his voice iron. "This is my company, my family, and my house. I'm not going to let him keep hiding behind lies." Within the hour, Colton's black SUV pulled up the long driveway. Graham stood waiting in the front hall, his posture rigid. When Colton stepped inside, his usual confident smirk faltered slightly at the sight of Graham's grim face. "You wanted to see me, boss," Colton said casually, removing his sunglasses and tucking them into his shirt pocket. "Yes," Graham said evenly. "In my study." Inside, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Colton's eyes darted briefly toward Vanessa, then back to Graham. "What's she doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "She's here because this concerns her," Graham replied, his voice calm but lethal. "I know what you did, Colton. I know about the money, the shell company. The threats!" Colton laughed, a short, mocking sound. "You've been listening to her. After 5 years, she suddenly crawls back into town, and you just take her word for it." Graham slammed his hand on the desk, the sound cracking like thunder. "Enough. The evidence is right here." He gestured to the laptop. "I trusted you. My father trusted you, and you've been bleeding this company dry." For a moment, Colton's mask slipped. His smile faded, his jaw tightened, and something cold flashed in his eyes. "You should have left it alone, Graham," he said quietly. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice shaking. "You almost killed me, Colton. You tried to make me disappear." Colton turned toward her, his lips curling into a sneer. "And I should have finished the job." Graham was across the room in 2 steps, grabbing Colton by the shirt collar and slamming him against the bookshelf. "You will never threaten her again," he growled, his face inches from Colton's. For a long, tense second, no one moved. Then Colton smiled, a slow, unsettling smile. "You think you can stop this?" he said softly. "You have no idea who I'm working for. Taking me down is just the beginning of your problems." Those words sent a chill down everyone's spine. "Get out," Graham ordered, releasing him abruptly. But know this, tomorrow morning the sheriff will have every file, every bank statement, every stolen dollar you touched. Your time is up. Colton straightened his shirt, his eyes full of malice. You've just made the worst mistake of your life, Whitmore, he said, before walking out. When the door slammed shut, Vanessa collapsed into the nearest chair, trembling. Violet came rushing down the stairs, sensing the storm that had just passed. "Graham," she said softly. Ethan heard the shouting. "He's scared." Graham rubbed a hand over his face, his anger giving way to exhaustion. "Take him somewhere safe," he said hoarsely. "Somewhere Colton won't think to look." "Just for tonight," Violet nodded. "I'll take him to my sister's farm outside the city." As she left to pack a small overnight bag for Ethan, Graham stood staring out the window once again. This wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning, and deep down he knew Colton wouldn't go down quietly. Night fell like a velvet curtain, but the Whitmore estate did not sleep. Graham sat alone in the study, a glass of bourbon untouched at his side, staring into the fire. Every crackle of the flames felt like a warning. He had spent years building an empire on trust and loyalty, and now both felt shattered. Upstairs, Vanessa paced the guest room, unable to settle. Every sound in the house made her flinch. She kept glancing out the window toward the driveway, half expecting headlights to appear at any moment, and then they did. Two beams of light cut through the darkness, moving too quickly to belong to anyone expected. Vanessa's breath caught. She ran down the hall and knocked on Graham's study door. "He's here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Graham was already on his feet, his face grim. "Stay here," he said, grabbing the revolver he kept in the desk drawer, something he hadn't touched in years. The SUV door slammed outside. Colton's voice echoed from the porch, mocking and taunting. "You think you can ruin me, Graham? Open the door like a man and face me." Graham strode to the front hall and flung the door open. Colton stood there, rain soaking his shirt, his hair plastered to his forehead. But he wasn't alone. Another man lingered in the shadows near the car, his face obscured by the darkness. "You've got 5 minutes to retract whatever nonsense you think you've uncovered," Colton said, stepping forward. "Call off the auditors, delete the files, and keep your mouth shut, or things are going to get ugly." "Ugly," Graham repeated, his voice like steel. "You came to my house to threaten me again. You should have kept running, Colton." Colton's smile turned feral. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about money anymore. This is about power. You think because you have a fancy name and a big house, you're untouchable. But people like me, we survive because we know how to play dirtier than you ever will." Before Graham could respond, a sound from upstairs made Colton glance past him. Ethan's faint voice calling for Violet. Colton's smile widened. "Ah, the boy's still here." Graham's blood turned to ice. "Don't you dare say his name." Vanessa appeared at the top of the staircase, her face pale. "Leave, Colton," she said, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. "This ends tonight." Colton took another step forward, lowering his voice. "You think you can save him, Vanessa? You couldn't even save yourself." The words were meant to break her, but instead they lit a fire. Vanessa came down the stairs slowly, deliberately, until she was standing beside Graham. "No," she said fiercely. "I left because I had no one to fight for me. But I'm here now, and I won't run again." For a moment, the air between them all seemed to vibrate with tension. Graham raised the revolver slightly, his voice low. "This is your last chance. Leave this property. If I see you here again, I won't call the sheriff first. I'll handle it myself." Colton's smirk faltered, just for a second, and in that moment Graham knew he had rattled him. Colton stepped back toward the porch railing, his hands raised mockingly. "Fine, have it your way," he said. "But don't think this is over. You've just made yourself a very dangerous enemy." He turned, shouting something to the man by the car before climbing inside. The SUV's tires spat gravel as it tore down the driveway into the night. Graham shut the door slowly, locking it this time. His shoulders sagged as the adrenaline began to wear off. Vanessa stood there, her hands trembling. "He's not going to stop," she said softly. "I know," Graham replied, his voice heavy. "Which is why tomorrow morning we go to the sheriff together, and I'll make sure Ethan is somewhere safe until this is done." Violet appeared then, holding Ethan, who had tears streaking down his cheeks. "He heard everything," she said quietly.
Graham crouched, pulling the boy into his arms.
"It's okay, buddy. I promise you, no one is ever going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." Ethan clung to him, whispering through sobs, "Don't let him take me." Graham's throat tightened, but he met Vanessa's gaze over Ethan's shoulder. In that moment he understood. This wasn't just about justice or revenge anymore. It was about protecting their family, whatever that meant now. And for the first time, Vanessa saw in his eyes something she hadn't seen before. Resolve mixed with something almost like forgiveness. Morning came with a storm that mirrored the tension in the Whitmore household. Thunder rolled across the South Carolina sky as Graham, Vanessa, and Violet drove into Charleston to meet with Sheriff Douglas Harlan, a grizzled man in his 50s who had known the Whitmore family for decades. Inside the sheriff's office, the atmosphere was all business. Graham handed over the files the auditors had prepared, thick folders filled with bank transfers, forged signatures, and damning evidence. Sheriff Harlan skimmed through the pages, his expression darkening. "This is serious," he said finally, looking up. "If this is accurate, Colton Briggs could be facing felony charges for fraud, embezzlement, and extortion." But he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "I need to warn you. If Briggs is as dangerous as you say, he won't go down without a fight. And he won't be alone." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. "He isn't alone," she said softly. "He was laundering money for someone bigger. Someone who runs a network that uses your hotels as a front." Sheriff Harlan frowned. "You know who?" "Yes," Vanessa said, her voice almost breaking. "I found out the name the night before I left town. It's not just some petty criminal. It's—" She stopped, glancing at Graham nervously. "It's who, Vanessa?" Graham pressed. Vanessa took a deep breath. "It's your cousin, Patrick Whitmore." The words hit Graham like a blow to the chest. For a moment, he just stared at her, unable to process what he'd heard. Patrick had grown up like a brother to him, had even helped manage one of the hotels until he stepped back a few years ago. "That's impossible," Graham said, his voice hoarse. "It's not," Vanessa insisted. "Patrick is the one who gave Colton access to the accounts. He's the one who warned me to keep quiet or lose my child." "I heard his voice that night." Sheriff Harlan leaned forward, his expression grim. "That would explain why this has stayed buried for so long. Patrick has friends in high places, even in this department. If he's involved, we'll have to be careful how we move forward. If he catches wind of this, he could vanish before we get a warrant." Graham's fists clenched at his sides. "Patrick sat at my table. He watched Ethan grow up. And all this time," he trailed off, his voice raw with betrayal. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you years ago, but I was terrified you wouldn't believe me, that you'd side with him. He's your blood." Graham turned toward her, something fierce in his gaze. "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal." Sheriff Harlan stood, pulling on his hat. "I'll need sworn statements from both of you," he said, "and I'll start assembling a case quietly. But you should be prepared. If Patrick finds out, he might try to intimidate you again. Or worse." Back at the estate, the tension was palpable. Evelyn waited in the foyer, her face pale. "What did the sheriff say?" she asked. Graham looked her straight in the eye. "He said we were right. And he said this goes deeper than we ever imagined." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. "Graham, Patrick called me this morning." The room went still. "What did he say?" Graham asked slowly. "That he knows what you're doing," Evelyn whispered. "And that you'd better stop before someone gets hurt." A chill ran down Vanessa's spine. "He already knows," she said in a hushed voice. Graham felt a surge of fury rise in him, stronger than anything he'd felt the night before. "Then he just made his last mistake," he said, his voice like ice. "Because I'm done letting this family live in fear." At that moment, Violet appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "Ethan's gone." Graham's heart stopped. "What?" "I went to check on him in the nursery, and his window was open," Violet said, her voice trembling. "His bed is empty. He's not in the house." The words struck like lightning. Graham's world tilted. Patrick had made his move, and now this was no longer just about money or power. It was about getting Ethan back before it was too late. The house erupted into chaos. Graham stormed through the hallways, calling Ethan's name, his voice hoarse with panic. Violet was on the verge of tears, searching every room, while Vanessa stood frozen in the foyer, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Graham turned sharply, his face pale but fierce. "Check the security cameras," he barked to one of the house staff. Within minutes, they were gathered around the monitor in the study. The footage showed Ethan's window opening slowly at dawn, and a shadowed figure climbing in. The man's face was obscured by a hood, but Graham recognized the gait instantly. "Patrick!" he growled. Vanessa's breath caught. He took him. Evelyn staggered back against the wall, one hand over her mouth. No, he wouldn't. "Yes, Mother," Graham snapped.
He would.
And he did. He grabbed his phone and dialed Sheriff Harlan. "They have Ethan," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Patrick has my son." On the other end, Harlan swore softly. "Sit tight, Graham. I'm putting out an alert and sending a unit to you right now." "No," Graham said, his grip on the phone tightening. "If we wait for the system to catch up, they'll be long gone. Patrick knows how to stay ahead of the law." Vanessa stepped forward, her voice urgent. "He won't hurt Ethan, not yet. Patrick wants leverage. He's going to try to bargain with you. That means he'll reach out soon. We have to be ready." Almost on cue, Graham's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. "Meet me at the abandoned dock at Shem Creek. Come alone." "You have 2 hours." Graham's blood ran cold. "He wants me to come alone," he said, showing the screen to Vanessa and Violet. "You can't go without backup," Vanessa pleaded. "If I don't, he could disappear with Ethan forever," Graham replied, his voice like steel. "This ends today." He went to his safe and pulled out the revolver again, checking the bullets. Vanessa grabbed his arm. "Graham, listen to me. If you go there angry, you'll lose him. Patrick wants you off balance. He wants you desperate." Graham looked into her tear-streaked face, his chest heaving. For the first time, he let the fury melt into something else, fear. "I can't lose him," he whispered. "Then don't," Vanessa said softly, her hand still on his arm. "But go there remembering that Ethan needs his father more than he needs vengeance." Violet appeared in the doorway, holding a small cross pendant. "Take this," she said quietly. "It belonged to Ethan's mother. Maybe it will remind you what's really at stake." Graham took the pendant, his fingers closing around it like a lifeline. He looked at both women, the two who had risked everything to bring the truth to light, and nodded. "Call Harlan," he said to Vanessa. "Tell him where I'm going. If I'm not back in 2 hours, he'll know where to find us." The drive to Shem Creek felt like the longest of Graham's life. The storm from earlier had passed, leaving behind a mist that clung to the ground and made the old wooden dock look like something out of a ghost story. Patrick was already there, standing at the edge of the dock with Ethan beside him. The boy's small hand was clutched in Patrick's much larger one, his face streaked with tears. Graham stepped out of the car slowly, every muscle taut. "Let him go, Patrick," he said, his voice low but carrying. Patrick smirked. "Not until you call off the sheriff and hand over those files. Destroy the evidence, Graham. Walk away and this all goes away." Graham took a step closer, the wood creaking beneath his feet. "You're my cousin. We grew up together." "How did we get here?" Patrick's face twisted. "You had everything handed to you. The name, the company, the respect. I had to fight for scraps. So I made my own way, by destroying everything our fathers built." Graham shot back. Patrick tightened his grip on Ethan, making the boy whimper. "Last chance, cousin." "Walk away." Graham's hand hovered near his revolver. But Vanessa's words echoed in his mind. Ethan needs his father more than he needs vengeance. Slowly, Graham raised his empty hand, showing he wouldn't draw. "Take me," he said quietly. "Let Ethan go. He doesn't belong in this fight." Patrick hesitated, clearly thrown off by the offer. For a moment, the only sound was the lapping of the water against the pilings. "This isn't over," Patrick said finally, shoving Ethan toward Graham before backing toward his SUV. "But next time, I won't be so generous." Graham scooped Ethan into his arms, holding him so tightly the boy squeaked. Patrick jumped into the car and sped away, his taillights disappearing into the fog. Graham stood there on the dock, clutching Ethan, his heart pounding with both relief and rage. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now it was personal. The morning after the confrontation at Shem Creek, the Whitmore estate felt different, not calmer, not yet, but alive with a new kind of energy. Graham barely slept, spending most of the night sitting by Ethan's bed, watching him breathe, vowing silently that he would never again allow fear to darken this house. At dawn, Sheriff Harlan arrived with 2 deputies. The evidence against Colton and Patrick was now undeniable. "We tracked the SUV," Harlan said, standing in the foyer. "Patrick's in custody. He didn't resist. Maybe he knew the game was up." Graham exhaled slowly, a weight lifting off his chest. "And Colton?" "Already picked up at his house," the sheriff confirmed. "He'll be facing enough charges to put him away for decades." For the first time in days, Graham allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Good." Vanessa stood at the bottom of the staircase watching the exchange. When Harlan left, she approached Graham slowly. "You kept your word," she said softly. "You risked everything to protect Ethan," Graham replied, his tone softer now. "If you hadn't spoken up when you did, I might have signed those papers and never known the truth. I would have built his future on a lie." Vanessa's eyes shimmered. "I didn't do it to take him from you. I did it so that when Ethan grows up, he knows where he came from, and that his father fought for him." Graham glanced toward the study, where the unsigned adoption papers still sat on the desk. He picked them up slowly, then tore them in half. "You're right," he said. "Ethan deserves more than a legal document. He deserves a family that tells him the truth, no matter how painful." Vanessa's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Graham said, turning back to her, "that you don't have to disappear again. Stay, be part of his life. He needs his mother, and maybe—" His voice softened. "Maybe I need you too." For a long moment, Vanessa simply stared at him, tears running freely now. "I thought you'd hate me forever," she whispered. "I almost did," Graham admitted. "But last night on that dock, I realized this family doesn't need more secrets. It needs healing." Violet entered quietly, Ethan's small hand in hers. The boy ran to Vanessa, who knelt and wrapped him in a fierce embrace. "Mama?" he asked softly, as if testing the word on his tongue. Vanessa broke down completely, nodding through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. Mama's here." Graham stood watching them, his throat tight. When Ethan turned and reached for him, Graham crouched and pulled them both into his arms, holding them as though he might never let go. The storm outside had passed, and sunlight now streamed through the tall windows, filling the house with a golden glow. For the first time in years, it felt like a home. That night, with Ethan asleep between them on the sofa, Graham and Vanessa talked for hours about the past, about the future, about forgiveness. When silence finally fell, Graham looked at her with something new in his eyes, something softer. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we face it together." Vanessa nodded, a small, hopeful smile on her face. "Together. I'm John Parker, and remember, every story hides a truth. And this one reminds us that family isn't built by blood or papers. It's built by courage, truth, and the choice to love, even when it's hard." If this story touched your heart, write in the comments where you're listening from, so we can reach more people around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the like button. It helps us keep sharing stories like this one, because sometimes the most unexpected truths lead to the most beautiful new beginnings.